Once again, hello to everyone on the call. I'm really excited to share our data governance journey with you all today. Joining me are my teammates Jonda and Bridget. I will let them introduce themselves and then we'll get started.
Good afternoon. I'm very excited to be here today. My name is Jonda Joseph, and I'm the Data Governance Manager at Froedtert and the Medical College of Wisconsin. I'm responsible for leading and managing all enterprise-wide data governance activities.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bridget Lewandowski. I'm a Senior Data Governance Analyst responsible for custom workflows, metadata ingestion, and user support.
Thank you, Jonda and Bridget. Next slide, please. Thank you. So before we dive into our data governance journey, I want to take a moment to share who we are as an organization, as it sets an important context to rest of the presentation. So we are two organizations named Froedtert Health and Medical College of Wisconsin, but we are recognized as a single brand, which is Froedtert and the Medical College of Wisconsin, or F and MCW for short. We operate as a single clinical enterprise to serve our patients and the community. Together, we are about 5 hospital locations spread across the southeastern Wisconsin region and 40 health centers spread across as well, serving in about 40 plus specialties. We take pride in being the southeastern Wisconsin's only academic medical center, as well as the only adult level 1 trauma center. Of course, we've been recognized and received various awards, like being featured in the US News and World Report, the Press Ganey Guardian of Excellence Award for our focus on customer excellence and consumer experience, as well as Vizient Award for our quality programs, just to name a few. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I've touched on some of the things here during the panel discussion, but I will further reinforce those. And as I said earlier, that our data governance journey had an interesting start. Like many other organizations, we had attempted data governance before as well, actually twice. And in like many other organizations, we were not successful. We failed at it. I have been fortunate to participate in those attempts as well in a different capacity than my current role. But then later on, when I was made responsible for data governance, these past experiences were really key in defining what outcomes we wanted to achieve to set up that data governance foundation. So I'll go over those previous experiences first, and then talk about the outcomes that this led to. So to begin with, one of the things that I touched on during the panel presentation was that we didn't really have executive buy-in, and neither did we have a formal data governance strategy. We were two separate organizations and two different technology platforms with its own infrastructure and firewalls, and really trying to bootstrap it together by using Excel or SharePoint to do data governance. And then again, being two different companies, it made it even harder to access these Excel or SharePoint portals across each other, which made the adoption of data governance even harder than it already is. And in addition, I also realized that we didn't have a dedicated data governance leadership, or a data governance team focused on data governance rollout and the amount of time and dedication it takes to get data governance off the ground. I also touched on that there was a notion that data ownership is by IT and clinical operational leaders and teams don't really contribute to that much. And also, of course, there was the focus when we talk about data governance, or in those previous attempts, the focus on data governance was mainly on data quality and on the technical metadata and how to organize our system in a meaningful way, which will lead to data governance. It was more of a MDM effort than a data governance effort. So those are the stack of experiences and learnings that played a pivotal role in figuring out what our next steps should be, what we shouldn't do, and that led to a few things that we should do. So we the outcomes that when we started this journey for the third time, what we achieved were, first, we made sure that we had enterprise alignment across the enterprise executives in both organizations, Froedtert as well as MCW, of our joint integrated data governance program, and prioritize that as a part of our annual strategic plan. Having that executive buy-in made a huge difference just to get started, just to get everyone's attention across the enterprise. Secondly, we developed a single cloud-based platform for all our data and analytic needs. We call it MyDA, which stands for My Data Analytics. It's a complex platform with multiple tools and technologies. And the reason why we wanted a cloud-based environment was that we could tackle the access issues and constraints that we would have if it was hosted within either one of the organization's firewall. And one of the key parts of this platform was the implementation of Colibra as our data governance tool. We've internally rebranded that as Data 360. So throughout the presentation, you might hear us say Data 360. That is our data governance tool. And over time, we established a full-time team focused on data governance as such. Jonda and Bridget are part of that team and enable data governance across the enterprise. And lastly, some of the things that I touched on previously as well, that we empowered our clinical and operational leaders to take charge of their metrics by introducing the metric owner and the metric steward roles. So that way, the focus was on what metrics are they using in their um, respective areas to solve the respective business and operational problems that they are addressing. And the data governance team essentially is a facilitator and data custodian. Overall, all of this led to overcoming the two organization challenges and enabled a great dyad partnership across both of these organizations. And of course, through all of this, we had to establish an interesting community structure within Colibra. And Jonda will walk us through more details of this unconventional community structure that we had to establish. Over to you, Jonda.
Thank you, Fahad. One of the lessons that we learned from and incorporated within our current state was building our community structure based on our dyad partnership across both organizations, Froedtert and the Medical College of Wisconsin, instead of the individual HR structures. In addition to reviewing the dyads, we also assess the enterprise committee structures and the commonalities with data and analytical needs. This approach enabled collaboration with various clinical and operational leaders, as well as empowered those leaders to participate and take responsibility for their governance roles and tasks. This approach also allowed us to increase our focus on citizenship, ownership, and stewardship. By educating the communities on foundational data governance concepts and practices. It helped build transparency, trust, credibility, since the leaders were heavily engaged in the process and were held responsible and accountable for the assets within their own communities. Next slide, please. We took the engagement a step further and recruited leaders and analysts within our community structure to participate in our Data Citizenship and Governance Consortium, also known as DCGC. DCGC met monthly and provided a platform for owners and stewards to serve as data citizens and implement practices in their respective communities. The group was also responsible for offering guidance and enforcing data governance policies and strategies so that they were standardized across the enterprise-wide. We worked to ensure consistency and commonality for data definitions, attributes, and metrics that were representative of Froedtert and the Medical College of Wisconsin. This provided another opportunity for partnership and to share and learn best practice initiatives for data, analytics, and governance. We also leveraged those same DCGC members to help develop and promote our metric approval workflow process. Bridget will go into additional details about this process and its roles within the next slide. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Jonda. Here at Froedtert and the Medical College of Wisconsin, we chose to implement a custom metric approval workflow, which includes two additional roles, an owner and technical owner. The left-hand side of the screen summarizes the progression of a metric when all users agree on the definition, while the right-hand side shows which users typically fulfill each role. The process starts when any user in the organization logs in to Data 360 and proposes a new metric. All they need is the name, description, reason for proposing, and target community. Next, the Data Governance Core team triages the metric to identify which specific user should fulfill each role. Stewards have the first opportunity to define the metric in detail. They're typically analysts or members of our Analytics Center of Excellence, which have an in-depth knowledge of the subject and work with the data on a daily basis. Next, subject matter experts, otherwise known as SMEs, are the next group to review and elaborate on the metric. They contribute an understanding of how data moves throughout the organization. Before the metric proceeds to the owner, the Data Governance Core team again reviews the metric and provides suggestions to the steward and SMEs if additional details are recommended. Then the metric moves to the owner. An owner is usually a clinical or operational leader in the organization that is held accountable for the metric. If an owner does not agree with the definition, they have the opportunity to reject the metric, returning it to the stewards to update the definition. If the owner approves, it proceeds to the stewards. Stewards are also clinical or operational leaders, but they are impacted by metric definitions and data changes. These users also have the opportunity to approve or reject a metric's definition. Similar to the owner rejection, the metric would return to the stewards for changes. If the metric is approved, it moves to the technical owner. This role is typically fulfilled by a data engineer, developer, or analyst that has a technical understanding of the data assets and manages the data systems or applications on a daily basis. This role identifies the data source and links the report, scorecard, or dashboard to the metric. After all these steps are completed, the Data Governance Core team publishes the metric. Now I know what you might be thinking. Wow, why are you engaging so many people in your metric approval process? As Fahad mentioned, here at Froedtert and the Medical College of Wisconsin, we didn't want to focus on data ownership, but metric ownership from clinical and operational leaders. One of the benefits of engaging so many roles is ensuring that everyone has a common understanding of a metric's definition, which includes frequency, data inclusions, exclusions, and calculation rules. Next slide, please. Now, why is it important that everyone understands a metric's definition? Because data governance is everyone's responsibility. It has required a shift in our organization's culture, but we've already started to see outcomes. For example, conversations have shifted from "your data is wrong" to "what definition did you use?" And instead of asking, where is the data? We're hearing that data lives here. Instead of IT or enterprise analytics owns the data, we're hearing we all own the data. Now, despite all of the processes and protocol we've implemented here at Froedtert and the Medical College of Wisconsin, data citizenship and governance is still a work in progress. Every day we look to improve and mature our data governance practices. Next slide, please. I would like to thank Calibra for giving us the opportunity to present our experiences and processes, and thank you to all for your attention. I would like to now turn it back to Chris, who's going to open it up for questions.
Great. Well, certainly thank you all. That was incredibly informative. Just one quick question here. How long does your approval workflow take? And does the data governance core team get involved if stewards are not engaged?
Jonda, why don't you take that one?
Absolutely. So the process is contingent upon the individual community that we particularly work with. So as Fahad mentioned early on, some communities are further advanced than others where they have their data and their analytics and they've progressed in their personal journey. And so with those particular communities, the process does not take at all, maybe somewhere from 30 to 60 days, depending upon the metrics that are getting loaded into Data 360 or Calibra. But for others, it can take a few months, and we do tend to interject if we see that time is progressing and they have not made any leadway. And so we have automated emails within our approval process, as well as follow-up emails that Bridget and I, reach out to the communities to kind of push them gently along so that they can progress further if it takes more time than intended.
One other thing I would also add to that, Chris, is that the initial part takes the longest because that's when there's the team formation and everyone's getting on the same page and trying to understand what are we really trying to even do here. But once that initial setup has happened, then the remainder of the time is going in the different iterations. And the way we've also set it up is that once the process begins, there is a timer that each of the folks in the respective responsibility have a certain time, and then by that time they have to respond, and then it moves on.
Great. Well, Fahad, Jonda, certainly appreciate the response. In the interest of time, I do think we're going to move on. Fahad, any final thoughts before we check in with UCLA?
Sure. Like I've said earlier, that this is no easy undertaking, and I'm sure everyone on this call agrees to that. My only thing will be is that it's not, don't expect data governance to take on and get adopted right away. It's a multi-year journey, and it's going to take its own pace depending upon the culture of the organization and numerous other variables. So start small, look at a pilot group who's interested, clinical, operational, business leaders who are data driven, make them your partners and get started like that, which will eventually scale up to becoming a formal data governance approach enterprise-wide. That has worked for us, and I hope it'll work for everybody as well. Lastly, I just want to say thank you everyone for joining, and thank you Calibra for giving us the opportunity to share our story. Displayed on the slide here are our contact information. We would love to hear from you. If you have any other questions that you weren't able to get to at this session, feel free to drop a note to us and we'll be sure to respond. Thank you again.